Hey there, gang. Patrick King here, coming to you live from Asheville, Ohio. Home again tonight, which is a rare thing, a couple nights in a row. Today's question comes to us from Wendy. Wendy asks, how can I transition my mare to riding bitless safely? We trail ride fine in a side pull, but I'd like to get more collection and control when competing in our ranch riding classes. Now, this one I think I'm going to tackle in two different pieces. So first, the transitioning to riding bitless safely. Wendy, if you're already trail riding in the side pull, then you've probably got a pretty good idea of what you're heading towards already. When it comes to transitioning to any type of gear with our horse, particularly when we're talking about headgear, whether it's a bitless bridle, whether it's a side pull, whether it's a traditional hackamore, the bosal and the macate, we want to think about how the horse understands the rider. You know, that's the biggest piece whenever I'm transitioning a horse or when I'm helping a horse and a rider to make a transition up or down, right? Whether it's from a bit to bitless or from bitless to a bit. It's about how does the horse understand the rider as far as the seat aids, the leg aids, and then of course the rein aids. So one of the things that I try to make sure that we have in place first is that the horse understands the rein aids from the ground before we climb on. All right, this is a good safe bet regardless of what it is you're asking your horse to do. If they have an understanding from the ground, then that's going to carry over into the saddle, or at least that would be the safe assumption, would be that would transfer over into the saddle. So the question that I would need to ask Wendy in this case is, what's she talking about when she's talking about riding bitless? Are we talking about riding in a traditional hackamore? Or are we talking about continuing in that side pull that she mentioned that she's riding in? Or does she have something else in mind? Whatever that gear is, regardless of how it functions, we need to make sure that the horse understands that from the ground first. We think of it kind of as a reverse aid education. We talk a lot about the rider's seat communicating 80% of the message, the lower leg communicating 18% of the message, and then the rider's hands communicating 2% of the message. I think about that a lot like the emergency brake on your car. You probably don't use it very often, but it's a good idea to know that it works in the event that you need it. I think similarly about the reins. Every time you're driving your car, you don't come to a stop sign and pull the emergency brake. When you're stopping at the stop sign, you would apply the foot brake. Similarly with the reins, every time we ask our horse for a transition or a stop or a turn, we don't want to be using the reins if we don't need to, but we need to be sure that the horse understands them for when the time comes to use them. So Wendy, I'd make sure, and everybody, I'd make sure that the horse was understanding how to kind of bend and that the reins in whatever headgear you're using connect directly to the horse's feet from the ground before you climb on. That to me is the best way for safety when we're trying to transition to, again, any piece of headgear. Wendy wants to transition to riding bitless, so we want to make sure that whatever it is she's putting on her horse's head, that elicits a response directly to the feet when we apply any of the aids before we climb into the saddle. Would be the same thing if we wanted to ride bridleless, right? Maybe we want to put a neck rope around our horse and ride just off of our neck rope. We would have to have the same thing in place, or we would sure hope to, for safety's sake, make sure that from that neck rope, the horse understood what we were asking before we climbed on their back, all right? So make sure, again, we think of it as the reverse aid education. Make sure they understand the reins before we climb on their back and expect them to work off of the seat and the leg. Then we have that fallback if they're not understanding of the seat and the legs. So, and now I want to tackle the second kind of piece of Wendy's question here. She says she's trail riding fine in a side pull, but she wants to get more collection and control when she's competing in the ranch riding classes. Now, being that she's talking about competing in the ranch riding classes, I'm going to make the assumption that she's talking about riding in a traditional hackamore. I don't know all the rules for the ranch riding, but I'm thinking that that would be one piece that would be allowed in that class. As far as a bitless option. So when we're talking about that, collection and control are two different things, okay? Collection is talking about the horse engaging the hindquarters, shifting more weight to the haunches, lightening and elevating the forehand. That is possible to a in a hackamore. Be careful with where we're going when we're talking about bitless options. There's a lot of bitless options out there, and I'm going to probably give the unpopular answer that bitless marketers don't want to hear, but a lot of the bitless options that are out there, biomechanically speaking, are crap. Okay, so depending on what we're trying to get from our horse, we might not be able to get or to teach collection with this bitless stuff that we see out there on the market. So I'm hoping that Wendy's talking about a traditional hackamore with the rawhide bosal and the rope macate, horsehair, mohair, whatever she wants to be made out of. That is going to work off of a balance for the horse, which works really well when we talk about the spectrum of balance that we're working in when we're talking about bringing a horse to collection. And maybe that's something that we should talk about in another one of our live broadcasts, is talking about that spectrum of balance so that we understand what collection really is, because it seems a lot of folks don't really understand that. If we're talking about framing the face, we're not talking about collection. I hope that everybody understands that. Framing of the face has absolutely nothing to do with collection. The face is the last piece of collection, and it falls into place. We don't hold it into place. So that's something that's, to me, it's pretty important for folks to understand. So again, when we're talking about riding bitless in the ranch riding stuff, I'm going in with the assumption that Wendy's talking about riding in a traditional hackamore. And again, that's something that we want to help educate the horse to on the ground, asking for slight lateral flexions, slight changes of bend, making sure that the reins connect to the horse's feet so that when we climb on the back, that's something that the horse understands. And we spend plenty of time educating the horse to that, as far as working in an arena, working in the trail, or on the trail rather, working in open fields, things like that, before we would go to a show where there may be lots of chaos. And it would probably be a good idea, if we have any questions about the amount of control that we have in any of our riding gear when we get to a horse show or a clinic, or some sort of high stress situation like that, or high pressure situation, it would be a good idea to again make sure that our headgear connects to our horse's feet before we climb on top. The last thing we want to do is climb up there and find out that the horse is not understanding, either because they're distracted or because they just kind of forgot in that moment. We see that happen with our horses all the time in these high pressure situations. We want to make sure we don't find that out after we've climbed on their back. So make sure that we take the time to educate them to that and check in kind of our pre-flight checks. Make sure that the horse is understanding of those things from the ground before we climb on their back. So I hope that that's helpful, Wendy, and to everybody out there watching this. I hope this gives you a better idea when we're talking about transitioning. It's not about the headgear. It's about the understanding of the headgear that's going to ensure our success. So Again, if that's helpful, please share this video, tag your friends, invite them to watch it. Question for the day. Let's see, what should we ask you guys? Question of the day. Since we're talking about headgear, what's your preference on headgear when you're riding your horse? Do you have a bitless preference? Do you have a bit preference? What's your preference when it comes to riding your horse, when it comes to the headgear? So give us your answers in the comment section below. I look forward to reading them. And don't forget, gang, you keep asking questions, I'll keep giving answers. Thanks so much.